What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Nick, and we're kicking off a batch of retro reviews here. We haven't done one of these in a while, and that was mainly because I think 2022 was loaded with a lot of releases. But we have this little period here where January is a little bit slow, so we have a chance to actually go over some bands that we can't necessarily rank because they didn't have enough releases, and there are tons of really good one-and-done albums out there, or two-and-done or three-and-done albums that we definitely want to cover on here, so I picked one. So today we are going to go over the lone full-length from Repugnant, Epitome of Darkness. This album was released in 2006 on Soul Cellar Records, and it has an interesting story behind it and some very interesting members behind it, namely the mastermind behind it, the guy that kind of took the helm of it, TOBIAS Forge, who is, well, very loved and very hated in the metal community, it seems. I don't know. Most of you know him from Ghost. I definitely know him from Ghost. In fact, that's where I first heard of him. But after finding out his identity and looking at all he's done, this was one that definitely stood out to me because, well, this kind of gives him some death metal cred. So a lot of the uber Ghost haters might have to eat some crow or shit here on this one. I recommend eating crow. It's probably better for you. This musically is so far removed from Ghost that you actually won't believe it's the same guy singing or writing the songs if you've never heard this before. This is flat out Swedish death metal, and very raw and very ugly Swedish death metal. And again, very far removed from, I would say, anything that TOBIAS Forge has done since the demise of this band, which we will get to at the end of this. But first, we're going to get into how they formed. This band formed in 1998 in Stockholm, Sweden, by one TOBIAS Forge. At least then he was known as Coppermancer with a K. I have no idea what that means, but much like Ghost, this band loves pseudonyms, so we're going to get into a lot of them. Also, much like Ghost, it is not known for having a stable lineup. At least with Ghost, they're wearing masks. You don't know who's actually playing unless you really do some digging. But in this band, there was also a lot of turnover in it, but, well, decidedly less makeup. I mean, there's still some makeup involved, but decidedly less makeup than, say, if you were in Ghost. So early on, TOBIAS recruited one Chris Barkensenyo. I'm going to have difficulty with some of these Swedish names in terms of pronouncing them, but that is pretty much par for the course with me. But luckily they have pseudonyms, and his name was Chris Piss. Chris would go on to join bands like Lick and Witchery and have a solid career, and then we also had Carl Envall, also known as Drunkenschwein. These names are kind of fun. He would join on bass, and he would later be in bands like Crucifier, and I believe he has two other projects right now, which unfortunately I didn't write down because my notebook is absolutely filled to the brim with notes here. So yeah, you just didn't have room to squeeze in any more band names. So this incarnation of the band put out the Spawn of Pure Malevolence demo in 1991. Very gritty, very ugly, and the reason I'm not gonna review the demos and splits and EPs they put out is because literally everything that they did ended up on their full length, Epitome of Darkness, so I'm just gonna kind of glance over what they did in the past and then just get down to Epitome of Darkness. So not long after this demo was released, TOBIAS changed his name to Mary Gore, which that's, I don't know, I mean, I still don't get that reference either, but, you know, it's a different name. But Carl would end up leaving the band. He was replaced by Incision guitarist Jonas Ahonen. Again, I'm really sorry. He would actually play bass on this and go by the name Roy Morbison, which might be one of my favorite ones that is on this entire fucking lineup of different people that jumped on here. They also added second guitarist Johan Wallen, who went by the name Sid E. Burns. Sideburns, it's funny when you see it printed out, I guess. After his tenure with this band, he would actually do some stuff with General Surgery, which I fucking love that band too, so another cool band I get a reference on here. And with this lineup, they will release the To The Death EP in October of '99, and pretty much furthering their underground status because they were getting a pretty substantial buzz at this point. But again, I said there's a lot of turnover in this band, and in 2000, Jonas and Chris would leave the band. They would be replaced by Gustav Lindstrom, which he would be known as Carlos Santhanas. I think that one's pretty damn good too. And on drums, Thomas Dwan, who would be known as Tom Bones, which he did some time with Dismember and Dr. Living Dead as well. So in 2001, this lineup would release the Draped in Cerecloth demo, as well as the following year do a split with Pinnacle called Dunkel Bassethet. I don't know how to say that. Anyway, that was released in 2002. Now, it is important to note that Epitome of Darkness, their full length, was actually done at this point. They had pretty much recorded it, it was mastered. I don't know when in 2002 it was done, but it was done and it just wasn't released for whatever reason. And again, it would kind of run like a compilation since it contained pretty much everything they released, including some stuff they released after 2002. Because in 2003 they would do a live split with the band Kamos, as well as put out their Perpetual Burial EP in 2004. So for whatever reason, this album did not show up until 2006, and we're gonna go over it right now. Honestly, I didn't even know about it until I actually saw it in a distro, and I just picked it up because it was advertised as Swedish Death Metal. I love that shit. Everyone knows that I'm a giant HM2 slut, and as soon as I saw that and the listing, like, oh yeah, it's HM2 Buzzsaw, pretty sure at least one nipple got hard. But looking into it after I got it, I was like, oh my god, that's fucking Papa. That's ridiculous. But listening to it, it was like, oh my god, this is even more ridiculous because this is so not like Ghost. This is incredibly raw, visceral Swedish death metal done with sort of a punky flavor. Now, I found out that there are multiple mixes of this album. In fact, they said like the vinyl version sounds different than the CD version just in terms of the mix overall. I have the CD version and it is absolutely caustic, but kind of in a good way because this whole album has a very thrashy, punky fucking energy to it. It's constantly fucking flying. There isn't a lot of groove on here. Like, this is just about fucking going as fast and as hard as you can for as long as you can, or at least until you collapse. As much as they use the buzzsaw tone, they're not sawing through anything slowly. They're just hacking wildly with an axe. And I'm not talking about chopping down trees. It's probably a fucking human body. Now, the way this album opens is almost misleading. Hungry Are the Damned starts off kind of slow and doomy. You hear this giant, crackly, kind of sizzly HM2 tone, and it's just, again, more ominous, foreboding, and then it kicks into the gear that this album will hold for most of its day and just flies. This album almost sounds like if Repulsion decided to do a flat-out Swedish death metal album, which that kind of sounds like a good descriptor for Death Breath because it does have a member of Repulsion in it, but this is possibly even more unhinged and feral. While this is definitely a homage/tribute to bands like Entombed and Dismember, I would say it goes even further back to bands like Nihilist or even like Carnage's more raw one-off album, which we did a retro review of not too long ago. This album often forgoes a lot of dynamics and switching gears or anything like that in favor of just being as energetic and explosive as it possibly can. I would say the first 6 tracks on here are some of the most unrelenting fucking Swedish death metal I've heard just in terms of speed and aggression. Blast beats, thrashy gallops the entire time. You really don't even get like a D beat on here. Like, this is just fucking going for it, and going for it with such an intensity that you can't help but to be impressed by it. Tom Bone's drum performance on here is absolutely unhinged. It sounds like it's just assault and battery on a drum kit. Constantly flying. There's not a lot of like very, creative fills or anything like that. It's mostly just primal and fucking just raw as hell. I mean, that works with the production, the overall vibe, and I have to say, TOBIAS has some killer fucking death metal vocals. They kind of sit between like death and thrash. They're more throaty and kind of a mid-range, but he enunciates well. He has a really good creepy delivery, but they do throw on some pretty creepy vocal filters on Premature Burial and Voices of the Dead just to add a little extra atmosphere. And atmosphere is kind of sparing on here. It's mostly done with just some vocal effects on here. Like, most of this, again, is about going for the throat and watching the blood spray everywhere versus, kind of bleeding someone slowly. And when comparing this to bands like Entombed and Dismember, because inevitably I will, because it's HM2 death metal, this is notably a little bit more thrashy sounding, like maybe a little bit closer to a band like Desultory, where I think thrash metal was a bigger influence. But songwriting wise, it feels more punk, like more stripped down to the bare essentials. You find a giant riff and kind of grind on it and play as fast and as hard as you can for that entire fucking song, and then maybe pepper in something to kind of make it stand out. And honestly, when it came down to the first 6 tracks, there is a bit of an issue with songs running into one another, but there are some things that do stand out, like melodic lead work. There are some melodic leads that pop up on here that Again, maybe a little bit more akin to stuff that TOBIAS would do later, but they do accent it well. Like later on, you get more dive bombs and stuff that you expect with death metal and shit like that. But the fact that there are more melodic leads on here kind of opens it up. And again, that kind of was a bit of an issue. The way this album opens up, you think you're going to get more swings from like groovy sections to doomy sections to punky D beats to thrashy sections. And most of it kind of holds on to one gear the entire time. But it's a fucking intense gear and you're kind of just locked in on it. It isn't until the back half of the album with songs like Sacred Blasphemy, Mutilated Remains, and Eating from a Coffin where the album starts to open up and sort of explore songwriting a little bit. And I think that might have to do with a lot of these songs being written with different eras of the band. Again, a lot of turnover. Granted, TOBIAS did write the majority of it, but this is stuff that was written as far back as 1998 or 99, and then coming out much later, and they had released a lot of stuff since then. So their sound was still evolving, and this was kind of all of it. Like, almost everything they fucking did was on this album. So naturally, you're gonna get some songs that sound a little bit different in terms of the dynamics and the, songwriting versus others. But these songs in the back half definitely explore some stuff that really isn't present on the front half. Sacred Blasphemy has some cool double time grooves, like maybe more akin to Bolt Thrower, albeit with a snarling HM2 tone. Mutilated Remains brings back the doomy feel on the bridge, which has one of the most standout sections of the entire album. There's a really good lead that, kind of accentuates the whole mood, and it shifts it from being super aggressive all the time to being a little bit more dark and sinister, which again, this album was kind of missing, a little bit of variety earlier on. And when they explore it, they're not abandoning, all the stuff that was, just making the front half this the most wild fucking ride they possibly could. It's still there, it's just done in pockets. And Eating from a Coffin has like a slightly more punky flavor to it overall. It kind of slows down the beat, like it's still fast. Like when I say this band slows down, it's not slowing down that much. So, don't get that twisted. Like you still get a lot of fucking like heavy grooves. And then of course it's inevitably back to the blasts and the thrashy fucking rhythms that are all over here. But yeah, they do slow down for them, we'll say. But Eating from a Coffin has some good, like, thrashy chugs on it, like a little bit more palm muted. They're not necessarily letting that snarly tone fucking ring out as much. And it's driven by some real prominent grooves, and I really like the fact that there are some distinguished riffs on here, because the guitars are just chugging along at Mach 10, much like everything else on here. So in terms of getting like some legit earworms, it can be difficult to distinguish like, melodies on here in terms of like the rhythm guitars with that gnarly tone and them going so damn fast. I also wonder if they had actually put these last 4 tracks and sort of mixed them up with the first 6 tracks on here, sort of break up the pace a little bit on this album. Like it wouldn't feel like such a tale of two sides on here, because the energy is still the same, but again, the dynamics change. The songwriting feels a little bit more mature, or as mature as, a fucking death metal band that sings about like zombies and eating from coffins and shit gets. But the main thing was the songs really stood out towards the end versus the front half being more memorable, not so much for the songs themselves, like individual songs, but mostly for just listening to it as a bullet train listen. Like, they almost kind of run together as one gnarly, fucking vicious, fast song. And honestly, I didn't have much of a problem with it. Like, it's just such a vicious, energetic listen that what it lacks in dynamics, it makes up for in just fucking intensity. But one of my big standouts on here, honestly, is their cover of Morbid's Another Vision. They do a fantastic job in there, and they really let the lead work shine on it. It's an awesome cover, and it does stand out a little bit, namely because it's more of a thrash metal song. It definitely has like the death metal bite that they add to it, but I love the lead work on it. Like, this really shows off some really incredible melodies. And it kind of sucks that it's not their own, it's a cover, but it's a standout song. They do an excellent job on it. But despite any issues I have with this album, I think it's pretty fucking enjoyable. And I kind of just like this raw bullet train listen. Like, again, those first 6 tracks on here, they move around like a fucking squirrel on meth, and I just dig it. And then that later half, hearing them open up a little bit, it kind of showcases that there was some really cool songwriting talent in here. So overall, I'm going to give this album a 3.5. I dig it. This is just a gnarly listen. It is as vicious as all the old school Swedish death metal that came out in the 90s was, and even some of the stuff that sort of influenced it along the way. It's very thrashy. It's very energetic. It is very raw. Like, you know, that is definitely sort of an issue with the production. Like, I like it, but it's so snarly that sometimes you kind of lose the sense of, like, you know, the melodies and the riffs in there. But again, there's something to be said for just a super unhinged, energetic fucking performance. Like, this is almost the Swedish death metal equivalent of, again, like Repulsion's fucking Horrified. It has a very similar vibe to it, albeit with an HM two-tone. That's kind of the only difference up until, like, you know, the last 4 tracks. I honestly do think if it was tracked slightly differently, I would probably get into it more, because as an album, it flows pretty well, but it is kind of a tale of two sides. But again, I just dig it. Like, it's just vicious as hell, and I love how just intense it is. These small spots of groove on this album do open it up ever so slightly, and there are some hookier riffs when you can make them out, but yeah, no, this is just a fucking banger of an album. If you were a fan, again, of just Swedish death metal, like, again, Dismember, Entombed, I would say Desultory is a really close one too. And maybe even some more grind-related stuff, again, like Repulsion. It definitely kind of fits in there too. Either way, check it out. It's a fucking good listen, and that was pretty much it. Actually, this is technically a posthumous release in terms of the band's life cycle, because the band officially broke up in 2004. And, well, what happened to the band? The obvious answer is Ghost. There's a little bit more to it, but Ghost is like the big fucking reason, because Tobias fucking struck gold, and now he's currently fucking filling arenas with people versus filling small clubs with sweaty death metal fans. Now, before Ghost, Tobias did take his Mary Gore persona onto a glam rock or glam metal band called Crash Diet, and then he also did do time in a band called Subvision, as well as Magna Carta Cartel, which he actually did have some members of Ghost in there. I think namely Gustav Lindstrom was actually in there, and he would go on become a nameless ghoul, which he probably was the one that was playing bass, because he played bass. Could be wrong. I'm gonna go with that as an educated guess, though. Now, years later, Repugnant did reform to do some one-off shows, once in 2010 for the Hell's Pleasure Fest, and once in 2011 for MDF, but those would be pretty much an entirely different lineup, save Tobias Forge. Now, of course, he returned on guitar and vocals as Mary Gore. This time on guitars, he would have Adam Zars, who he would go by DD Sars as his pseudonym in the band. He was from Tribulation, actually still plays in Tribulation, which is a fucking awesome band. Gottfried Amann. It's one of those names where it has the big circle on top of the capital A in his last name. I don't know what sound that fucking makes, so I'm just gonna say Amann. A-H-M-A-N. Anyway, he came in on bass and played in the unbelievably underrated In Solitude, which they put out 3 albums, and honestly, I kind of want to go over them in a retro review as well. But he was known as G Grotesque in the band, and that's infinitely easier to pronounce than his actual name. There are no umlauts or anything to further confuse me. And on drums, he had Emil Svensson of the band Degiel. He was known as E. Forcus, and I don't know what that's a reference to, but it sounds like an interesting name. But those are the only 2 times the band is reunited. Well, I mean, all right, Tobias came back and then got, you know, session players to come in. Not sure if you can call that a reunion, but you have the principal songwriter in there. Kind of the same thing with Ghost. He's the only original guy in there, and I think he's the only one that's like the principal songwriter, and everyone else is just hired guns. Guess that's kind of a theme with him. And that is pretty much it for this band in terms of their history, unless they choose to get back together. And yeah, going over this one, you know, looking at what people say about it, despite Tobias Forge being in it and it kind of being a divisive figure, a lot of the response to this album is overwhelmingly positive. And that's really good, because it's a solid album. And honestly, it pays tribute, much like a band like Bloodbath does, to this awesome fucking style of death metal that I definitely love, like, a lot. I had this one singled out as a retro review for a while. I've been wanting to go over it for, you know, some time, and just kind of decided, like, you know what, I'm going to kick off some retro reviews with this one, because this is just a flat out fun album. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. That is our store. We have shirts there. We do need to reload on them. Again, you know, we just get busy with shit and we keep fucking forgetting. But if you'd like to help us out on Patreon, there's a link there too. And Denver Death Fest, again, we are trying to hunt down another venue. I think we are having some progress here. I think we have it narrowed down to 3. So hopefully we can make an announcement here soon about us finding a venue and then showing you the lineup, which that'll be a surprise to me too. So I'll be watching that video as well, because I don't know who's all playing on, because this is mostly Miller and John. Either way though, when we know more, you will know more. And of course, thank you all for liking, subscribing, following, all that stuff. It means the world to us. It's awesome to see this channel grow. We have a ton of stuff we're trying to do for this year in terms of content, and we can't wait to show off all the different reviews and different rankings. It's going to be a blast. And make sure to stay tuned at the end of the Crowbar ranking, which we are currently fucking sitting through and listening to all those albums and writing our notes. But at the end of that, we will announce what our next batch of rankings will be, as chosen by our amazing fucking patrons. Thank you guys again for your support. And of course, yet another giant thank you to you all, because this is the thank you part of the video where I get awkward and I run out of things to say other than thank you. So I'm just going to say thank you one more time, because I don't know, I'm fucking brain broken, but I fucking mean it. You guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.